Welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. This is Frank Gaffney, your host and guide for what I think of as an intelligence briefing on the war for the free world. One of the men that I have come to admire most in the United States Congress, both for his intelligence as well as his service to our country, both in uniform and now in the Congress of the United States, is Congressman Jim Bridenstine. He is a combat veteran, Navy pilot, a man who has had tours in, or at least over, the skies of Afghanistan and Iraq on a number of occasions. He has trained others to do the same. He is today a member of the House Armed Services Committee and also the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, where he chairs its Subcommittee on Environment. He represents with great distinction the people of the 1st District of Oklahoma and is always welcome here. Congressman, thank you very much for taking a few minutes to join us.
Always, Frank. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's Iran deal around here, Congressman, and I'm anxious to get your thoughts as well as those of other guests today on the latest developments. You've recently penned a very thoughtful piece about the fundamental problem with this deal, of course, and before you get into all of the particulars, it's who we're dealing with. Talk about that, if you would.
That is absolutely right. So we're dealing with a country that is the world's largest exporter of terrorism. We're talking about a country that has destabilized the Middle East. They are sending troops, militias into Iraq and Syria. Of course, they have for many, many years been funding Hamas and Hezbollah. On top of all of it, they have not renounced their terrorist ways. In fact, they have said they're going to continue doing their foreign operations as they always have. This is a nation that has Americans held hostage right now. This is a country that one of those people being held in an Iranian prison is somebody guilty of being a Christian. And that is what is so astonishing here, that we would go forward with this kind of agreement that enables them to have an industrial nuclear capability, knowing full well that they intend to continue being belligerent throughout the world and exporting terrorism. And they do not recognize the right of Israel to exist, and they have said and continue to say that they're going to wipe Israel off the map, and their leaders go to the streets of Tehran and start yelling death to America and death to Israel. This is a country with whom we just made the deal.
This seems absolutely insane, especially the idea that we would give them $150 or so billion. What your colleague, Congressman Pete Roskam, says equates to roughly $8 trillion in our economy. You've been at the pointy end of the spear defending our country against various enemies. One of the things that money will assuredly do is buy conventional weapons as well as more nuclear capability that will almost certainly be used against us. Give us a sense of how we've seen the Iranians actually bring death to Americans to this point and what you think they could do with $150 billion more to do it with.
There is no doubt that that money will be used for their military. There is no doubt that their military is now fanning across the Middle East, expanding and growing, and of course supporting the Assad regime in Syria and continuing to destabilize Iraq, and of course their operations in Yemen and Hamas and Hezbollah. Look, we know that $150 billion is going to be used not necessarily to support the domestic agenda of the Ayatollah, but to export terrorism around the world. There is no doubt about this.
And again, to the extent that that is the case, this would appear unmistakably far from being the formula, as President Obama insists, for peace rather than the alternative, which he insists is war. Just more war, a continuation of the war that we've been in since 1979 with these guys. What am I missing here, Congressman?
It's not, hey, if you sign the deal, we have peace. If we don't sign the deal, we have war. It's just the opposite. Once we sign this deal, we're going to have war. The reason we're going to have war is because Israel is not going to allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. Israel will not allow that to happen, which this means if we, the United States of America, stand up and say we're going to give Iran an industrial nuclear capability, that means Israel is going to have to take the issue up themselves. And they've done that in the past. I'm confident they'll do it again. And so this is a guarantee that war will come. Unfortunately now, if depending on how long this takes, we could be looking at a war that includes the release of nuclear weapons. And that's the scary part of all this.
I actually was addressing a rally here in New York City where I'm recording from today. The point that I am concerned about is whether the Israelis strike first or not. We're assuring that the war that the Iranians have been waging against them and us will have a nuclear component to it going forward. So you're looking at dramatic and horrific ramp-up of it, especially if others in the region decide they better get their own nuclear weapons. It's a formula for, at least regionally, an Armageddon, if not something that extends far beyond. And Congressman, with all of this said, and again, our guest is Congressman Jim Bridenstine of Oklahoma, a member of the House Armed Services Committee whose personal service in uniform with very, very considerable distinction is one of the things that makes him particularly influential on these matters in the Congress. How do you see this playing out? One other component of it, especially given your other portfolio, the Science Committee, that worries me is the Iranians are pursuing a nuclear capability. It appears in the expectation that they would be able to use it, an electromagnetic pulse specifically, and you're a member of the EMP caucus in the House, against our electric grid. This is an environmental catastrophe of the first order as well as a formula for perhaps death to America. Is that something that we should realistically be expecting to be on the table as well?
Certainly that capability will be there. This is why it's absolutely critical that we have a missile defense capability. It's critical that should they launch something like that, and by the way, they are not slowing down their ICBM capabilities. This deal doesn't even talk about them not being able to build intercontinental ballistic missiles. They're still going to continue developing and building newer and longer-range intercontinental ballistic missiles.
Yeah, and as perhaps as little as 8 years and maybe much less, they're actually going to be out from under any embargo on having technology flows.
And they're already launching things into space. And they're launching to the south, which comes over the Western Hemisphere. So what you're talking about is a very, very real threat. It's why you cannot allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. It's why we have to harden our infrastructure. When you talk about EMP, we're not just talking about the grid, although that is critically important, because if the grid goes down, our entire way of life collapses. But we're also talking about melting electronics and our cell phones not working and not being able to use the electromagnetic spectrum at all. This would be catastrophic for society in the West. So absolutely we need to be very vigilant about that.
Congressman Jim Bridenstine, you've made a very compelling case, it seems to me. I'm sympathetic to it, of course, but I think objectively it is a very compelling case that the deal that President Obama, I call it the Obama bomb deal, is ill-advised and dangerous in the extreme. That being said, what are the prospects that a sufficient number of your colleagues will join forces with you in opposing it to defeat this deal?
Well, I think, first of all, everybody needs to understand your entire audience. I would presume your audience is largely conservative, maybe Republican, but I want to be clear for those that are listening right now who might not have a conservative bent, that this is not a partisan issue. There are a lot of Democrats here in the House of Representatives that are extremely concerned about this deal, and rightly so. This is not partisan. The president is going to make an effort to make this partisan because he is committed to the deal. However, reasonable minds, people that are thinking about this reasonably, who are taking their time and saying this isn't about being a Republican, it's not about being a Democrat, they have tremendous concerns, and what we need to do is we need to actively engage both sides of the aisle and let people know this is not the direction our country should go. We should not give Iran an industrial nuclear capability, knowing full well that 10 years from now they're going to be able to walk into a nuclear bomb without even breaking the deal.
Right. And to say nothing of protecting it in the meantime. I mean, this is just madness upon madness. Congressman Jim Bridenstine, we have to let you go. I know you've got a day job to attend to. We appreciate you taking a few minutes to visit with us about it. I hope that your call for a bipartisan approach to this problem and a recognition that, among other things, that EMP problem is the ultimate transpartisan threat will actually carry the day in the days ahead. Thank you very much for your service again, both in uniform and now in the Congress. Come back to us again very soon. Fred Fleitz joins us next. We'll talk with him about secret side deals with the Iranians. What's up with that and more straight ahead.